Welcome to Diversitas, a show at the crossroads of diversity, business, and culture. Today, we are so happy to have Bruce Crawley, who is principal of Millennium 3 Management. Perhaps as important, if not more important, he's a real icon for Black business in Philadelphia. He's been in business as an entrepreneur for I would say a long time. I don't know how you feel about that,
No,
Mr.
no,
Crawley, but he's been in business for a long
I've been
time
an
as an
asshole.
entrepreneur, and so we welcome him to our show. How are you?
I'm fine. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. So, I know that you are an entrepreneur. We're going to get to that. But what's been taking up your time recently? What have you been doing good for yourself?
Well, for one thing, I spent a lot of time at board meetings for Independence Blue Cross, and we just had a change in CEO, and I'm on the executive committee, and I also chair the trustee committee, the directors committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this has been a busy time for all of that. So I love the work we do with Independence Blue Cross. Been doing that for a long time. But I also do work in the community that I grew up in, Richard Allen Homes and public housing. And we started about 5 years ago with a program we called RANG, Richard Allen New Generation. And clearly I was not the new generation, but we had a commitment to young people and tried to make sure that people had some defense against gentrification in the community and some defense against the drive-by shootings that were taking place. But it was good. We got it started, and we became an RCO, and we had not been very familiar with the concept, but we got involved with it, went down to the Planning Commission, filed, and we were approved as an RCO. And our footprint on the RCO is what was essentially the neighborhood that we grew up in, and that's from Girard to Spring Garden, from Broad to 8th Street. And if you're an RCO, then the city council and the planning department says to developers, if you want to do a development in this community, you have to contact the RCO, and you have to work out a community benefits agreement. And we did one with Post Brothers, and our agreement was we need to have a percentage of the jobs, and these were skilled trades jobs, not the normal laborers jobs that Black folks are allowed to have in the city of Philadelphia. And so we've trained at this point 43 young people who are gainfully employed. This is not a union operation. This is a merit contractor situation, and it works very well. And
well, Post Brothers, they don't have unions. They don't.
What's that?
I said Post Brothers, I don't think they use union labor generally unless they absolutely have to.
No. And coincidentally, they came into our community, and we were not especially excited about what unions had been doing with African-American people and Hispanic people. And we looked at the footprint, which is essentially West Poplar, and we looked at the composition of trades and jobs that existed in that area, and the construction industry represented 1.2%. So we weren't surprised by that at all, but it just reaffirmed what the mission had to be. So we've been doing that since then. So
is there a lot of development in that community now?
Yeah, I mean, where the general rule for gentrification related development is that where the prices of the commercial real estate are cheapest, that's where you have the most development. And so it is 19123, and I think it's 19140 down in South Philadelphia. And the two of them have the greatest development and gentrification record in the city.
So what's interesting about what you guys are doing, that's fantastic, first of all, because it really speaks to a problem that I have faced in in helping owners and developers with their diversity and inclusion programs, right? So on the enterprise side, it is ironically been an easier lift to get them to where they need to get to. But on the workforce side, it's terribly difficult. And it's terribly difficult because most of these jobs are union jobs. Most of these construction projects, I should say, are union projects. And there ain't people of color in these unions, besides putting the laborers aside, of course. But when you talk about the carpenters, when you're talking about the electricians, when you're talking about iron workers, all like that's not happening. So
Right.
to the extent that you can create opportunities for people in those areas is fantastic.
Well, as a perfect example of what you're talking about, we had watched what was happening with the rebuild project. There was a lot of hype around rebuild and how the mayor was saying, in fact, that it was going to be the way to include people of color in the skilled trades, in the construction industry overall.
Right.
And I remember seeing them do a lot of interviews and advertising and radio spots. And at the end of the day, they had a track record of having achieved 900 applications from young people who believed what they said. But then when they got down to vetting the 900 people, that had to go through the same union approval process, and they wound up with 16 people being approved. So it was not a brave new world for involving people of color in the construction trades. So our young people, like other young people, don't believe when they hear construction, they assume union. And when they assume union, they know they're not going to get a job. And so we wanted to change that. And the only way we could do it was to go through a merit shop. And thank God, Post Brothers was assigned to our community, and we cut a deal with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know whether there is another way to do it, unless you can get unions really on board, which they have not. They've been resistant to. I don't know whether there's any other way to do it but the way you've done it.
Yeah.
Honestly. I mean, so hats off to you on that. I didn't know. So I know that you had talked about that organization before. I did not know it was an RCO. So you are all in the mix in terms of negotiating with owners and developers on on EOPs, on community benefits plans and all of that kind of stuff. That's awesome. That's tremendous.
And the other thing we do is, at about the same time we started the RCO, we got really frustrated with trying to do business and trying to make change in our community as Black people. And we thought things got overly politicized. We found that people who were elected officials didn't always come out immediately to support what was happening in the community. And we thought that was sad. And we said, well, maybe if we go to another country, another continent, we can have more success. And I was riding bicycles at the time. So my wife and I were looking around on the internet and said, well, where do people need bicycles most, where we can have a charitable outcome, we can have a community benefit outcome. And one of the places was West Africa. And we heard that Ghana was a place. And then we looked online and saw there was a woman who made bicycles out of bamboo. And we called her, cold call to Ghana, to Kumasi, Ghana. And we said, look, we got a deal for you. We'll buy the bikes you manufacture and give them away free to young people in rural Ghana. And she said, hell, that's a deal. I can't turn that down. So we did that with her for about 2.5 years. We gave out 500 bikes. And then
how much were the bikes, if you don't mind me asking?
What's that?
How much were the bikes?
How much?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we had the commercial price. So I don't
okay. Okay.
But we paid for it.
Okay.
So I don't know what she's selling retail for now. So
right.
I don't want to jeopardize her business.
Sure. I understand.
But in any event, when we decided that we wanted to move on from that, the second tier mission of our organization, of our foundation, was to bring more awareness of IT and communications to students in rural areas of Ghana. So we did a rebranding of the organization that we used to call the African Bicycle Company, and we changed that to the Collaboration for Communications and IT Excellence. And that was designed to put computer labs into schools, again, in rural areas of Ghana. And we did a demonstration project in a place called Bogatanga, which is in the northeast, the upper east region of Ghana. My wife and I put the computers in our luggage and carried them up with the monitors, got on a plane and flew up from Accra to Bogatanga. And we did a demonstration project, and they set up that lab there, and it's working like a charm. We use that to attract education and business and political leaders to the board. And now we're ready to rock and roll. And then we found a guy who is a Ghanaian, but who has spent a lot of time in the US. And he is given credit for being one of the founders of Broadbean, right? And so we're working now to do an infrastructure for the schools, because they need access to the internet, even if we give them a computer. And that should work out pretty well. The only complicating factor is that as you know, last March, nobody could get into or out of Ghana. So,
I was actually going to ask you about that.
So we've been having board meetings by Zoom,
right,
like all the other meetings that are taking place by Zoom.
Right.
But it's been working very well. Working very well.
How often have you been over there? How many times have you been over there?
Before COVID, I had been over there 5 times.
Wow.
Yeah, we have a good network. Some of the visits over there were to give out bicycles in the Ashanti region and that kind of thing. And then we did 2 more, and when we started to go up north and go around to other parts of the country to visit potential locations for the school. So it's working well.
Why did you pick Ghana?
Well, you know, when we started talking about getting involved with doing a charitable focus on bicycles and giving them out in West Africa, we called some of these organizations that have a great reputation for doing that. And they're not run by African-American people, but they have a great reputation. If you look at the bicycle magazines, the trade publications, you see full-page ads. And so I called them up and said, look, I want to be in this business. We want to give out bikes. We got a manufacturer, and we want to do this in Ghana. They said, well, we don't have relationships in Ghana. We can get you into Zimbabwe tomorrow. I said, I don't want Zimbabwe. I want Ghana, because the man who did the democratization of Ghana and threw off the British colony, went to school at Lincoln University, and then that's right, and then went to school at the University of Pennsylvania. And so we feel a kind of connection, and we also realize that many of the people who came to this country came from that part of West Africa, and so there's a great prospect. And we did our Ancestry.com stuff, and there was a lot of Ghana and Nigeria and Benin and, you know, that kind of stuff in there. So we knew we would be getting close to the people who brought us here.
Right. Have you done any other travel in West Africa besides Ghana?
Not much. I mean, we get over to Cote d'Ivoire, which is right next door. When we get up to the north, we go across the border and get into very dangerous country, revolutionary country. But let me see, what is the name of that country? We get in there and we get right back out. It'll come from me before it's over.
Obviously not Nigeria, although
No, not Nigeria. And Nigeria is not a place that we have been thinking about going to.
Yeah.
But no, I'd been to South Africa before,
Right.
but that was a separate mission and a separate time.
I have never been. It's like one of those trips that I've always wanted to do. I just haven't had a moment to.
You love it. You love it.
Yeah.
You kiss the ground and wonder why it took you so long.
Yeah. I want to go to Ghana. I want to go to Senegal. Now I heard Cote d'Ivoire was a little shaky right now. Is it?
I mean, a lot of places are shaky if the colonizer doesn't want to decolonize. And so the French are still raising hell. The French are raising hell in Senegal. The French are raising hell in Morocco. I mean, it's all the same Ruski that we've been dealing with for at least since the Berlin Conference,
right?
1884. That's been going on since that time.
Yeah.
The only country that in Africa that really was able to fend off the decisions made by the Berlin Conference was Ethiopia, and that was assigned to be taken over by the Italians. And when the Italians got there, the Ethiopians kicked their natural butts. and it's very interesting. If you go online and go on YouTube, you can find video of African-American men in the 30s and the 40s, early 40s, middle 30s, who were signing up with card tables on the sidewalk.
That's interesting.
To enroll to fight for Ethiopia.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
And I wondered why when I was a kid, I used to wonder why all the churches were named Abyssinia this and Abyssinia that. That was Ethiopia's name. And the people who were descendants of the slave trade had great respect for what the Ethiopians had done and were still doing.
Right.
They would never colonize.
Right. I love it. So let's bring it back to the United States. Let's bring it back to our fair city of Philadelphia. Tell me about Millennium 3. What is Millennium 3? What does it do?
Okay, Millennium 3 is a company that deals in traditional and digital marketing. It does communications, traditional and digital PR, research based on all those things. We do social media monitoring. We write press releases. We do that kind of stuff. And so those two elements are what I trained in when I was at First Pennsylvania Bank. My degree, undergrad, was marketing management, BS, and my master's was at Temple, and that was in journalism.
Okay.
And so when I came into the work world, those are the kinds of things I did. I was trying to put the two pieces together, and we came up with first Crawley, Haskins, and Rogers, Crawley, Haskins, and Sloan, and then we changed it to Millennium 3 because we were getting to a point where we realized that if you change names because of a partner moving out, you got to change your website. You got to change your email. And so we said, no, there won't be any names of partners in the name of this company anymore. It will be Millennium 3 Management. And that's how we wound up with that.
It's interesting that you did that because I've been struggling with that on the law firm side. Law firms are obviously
right
for
names and principles, even if there are 10 of them.
Correct. And so I did a name change of my law firm to Impact Law, and I'm still not used to it. I still struggle with it because of the law firm culture. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to your point, I think it's better in terms from a branding perspective if you have something that's going to be there, that's solid, and it doesn't matter who is kind of under the banner, the banner remains. The
culture is consistent and the people do what they have always done.
Right.
And people don't ask you questions about the fourth name on the headline. So
right. What happened to so-and-so? Yes.
well,
Yes.
where's so-and-so?
Yes. Yes. So tell me, so you were working for, a big bank, whatever. What made you decide to go out and start your own thing?
Well, the longer I stayed in the bank, and I was there for about 20 years. And at the time, I went in as a management trainee, and I left as a senior vice president. I had been the vice president of advertising, and then became the senior vice president for public and investor relations. But it was about the time when banks were merging and acquiring and all that kind of stuff was happening. And the surprising thing was, being in Philadelphia, we assumed that at least in the state of Pennsylvania, most of the acquirers would be banks from Philadelphia, and that did not happen.
Not the case. That was absolutely not the case.
Pittsburgh came in like a ton of bricks. And the problem was that good friends across all of the banks in this region started to get absorbed in that process. And it was happening in bits and pieces at First Pennsylvania Bank. And I saw people march to the doors, don't touch anything. And these were good workers, but it was just the rules of the acquisition process. And I said, I'm not going to sit here and lose a job for doing a good job. I'm going to get out first. And we started to think about that. And we also were concerned about having people tell me about PR and marketing who had no qualifications for either one. They just had a title in a bank. And I said it was time to go. And so we did it.
And
best thing we ever did.
And so when you went out, I mean, did you go out? Did you already have a client? Did you have to go out kind of?
No. We had a business plan, and we had a timeline on the business plan. And we said, we're going to go after these segments. We're going to talk to these kinds of people, and we're going to get these things done by X date. And that's our plan. And if we're lagging in any of those things, we'll know we've been unsuccessful to date, and we have to step it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing was, because we had been on boards of not-for-profit boards and some for-profit boards and some community-based boards, we found that Philadelphia is a place where a lot of business is not done at parties, as in New York.
Right.
That kind of thing, the
Right.
Wall Street parties, and the stuff that happens on the famous boulevards of New York and Central Park. That's not where business is done. Business is done in the nonprofit boards, and people sit there and they introduce themselves to one another. And if you can prove yourself as a contributor to that nonprofit board, I don't mean a financial contributor, I mean a
Right.
intellectual contributor,
Right.
then they have confidence that you might be able to do something for them. And so that's how we did it. We put that in our business plan.
I love that.
And we started rolling. I mean, it took me longer to get really rolling than I thought it would take. But
what was your first big opportunity?
Well, we had several. One was United Bank.
Okay.
I knew Emma Chappelle from
God
being
rest
in
her soul.
the Black banking organization here, and she was having some problems, and she called us up and asked if we would help her find some investors, and we did that. And that logo that you see we did that logo.
Is that right?
I don't know, 1981 or whatever it was, but we did that logo then, 1991, and so that was big. It was high profile, and we were always in the paper talking about investor events and logical opportunities for having a Black bank in Philadelphia, and it was a thing that people had heard about or talked about, and they were wondering, how did this firm know about this kind of thing? And so it was a good thing. And then it was the whole political arena. We had done things before we got into that business, but I saw John Street, who I barely knew, although he was living in North Philly and so was I. But
And they're like the same area, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so I saw him on TV and in the newspapers, and I called him up one day and said, you thinking about running for mayor, and you need a PR firm. He said, well, I'm coming over to your office. And then he said, what is PR? And so we had that conversation, and we began to do research to determine whether his reputation was as bad as people thought it was. And we found that it wasn't. And we started doing some good things. And he became the president of city council and then ran for mayor. And so at that point, we moved away because we didn't like the direction it was headed. But we thought that he needed to be the mayor of the city of Philadelphia. First, we thought he needed to be the president of city council. And all of that, again, was a high profile opportunity. We didn't do it to get a high profile opportunity, but the nature of running the communications for a city council person who eventually became the president of city council, who eventually became the mayor, was good stuff for us. It didn't hurt us at all.
So that's interesting. So you started working with John Street before he became council president. I don't think I knew that.
Right.
I don't think I knew that.
He was head of the 5th Council Man District.
Right.
And he put Darryl in. Darryl was working for him there.
Yes.
He put Darryl in, and then Darryl became 5th Council Man and the president. But that was the path he took.
So you had identified him as somebody who could ascend to the president of city council.
Oh yeah. And I on a personal level, I was not enthused about the people who were his enemies, and so there was a guy who I thought might be a good candidate, and people who I would like to stick it to if I could, by having a really well done communications campaign for the candidate.
Well, it's interesting because that people don't, people don't remember that they don't remember the John Street that was fighting the dude in the middle city. Like people don't remember that. Right. And so in terms of you doing research to determine whether or not, he could, his reputation was as bad as people may have thought it was, that was part of your calculus, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And once we got the data back, we were hoping it would come back that way. But once we got it back, then we publicized that like hell and said, in these precincts, in these parts of the city, John Street would actually win if the election was tomorrow. So that kind of stuff is what we did, and it worked well.
Right. So your business moves on and goes through various iterations. You have Millennium Fee Management. At some point, I guess during this whole period of time, you were doing board work in some way, shape, or form. Is that right?
Board work.
You were on boards.
Yeah, I was mostly like most good professional African Americans. I was on not-for-profit boards the most, and spent a lot of time doing those kinds of things. The Urban League, and then I started the African American Chamber, and when I started that, we became the chairman of the chamber and hired a president, and did that for 13 years. I was the chairman of the chamber. But I remember when we stepped down from being the chairman of the chamber, good friends would come to me and say, well, now what are you going to do for a living? I said, I didn't get paid for that. I was the chairman. We had a president who got paid, but it was.
When did you start the African American Chamber?
Huh?
When did you start the African American Chamber?
It was must have been 2003. I had gone down to a public relations conference in Dallas, Texas, and by chance walked into a room looking for a meeting for the Public Relations Society of America, and lo and behold, there was a banner across the front of the room that said, the 51st annual meeting of the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce. I said, what? How can that be? This is in Dallas, Texas. This is in the South. We are in Philadelphia and we don't even have a Black Chamber of Commerce. And we came back and started talking to some people and got them to sign and to make contributions to generate capital. And we were off and running. Got one of the big banks, the guy who was the head of PSFS gave us that space originally. We got about 2,000 square feet from him to put our original offices in.
Right.
And we were doing everything we had to do to look like grown people. But it was good. But after 13 years, it was time to go. I had to get out of there.
It's interesting that you went to Dallas and had that experience. My experience is that there are many other places in our country where Black commerce is more advanced than here in the oldest city in the country.
Right.
What do you I mean, there are there could be many answers to this, but what do you attribute that to? Why is that?
Well, when I look at cities around the country, Chicago, New York City, LA, stuff like that, the cities that you think are the big cities.
Right.
Those places are places where the residents are relatively open to having new people come in and become contributors to the economy.
Yeah.
Happens in New York every day,
Right.
happens in LA every day, happens in Chicago. When you come to Philadelphia, the business community is also in a neighborhood function, and they are also protective and territorial about the business that's being done.
Right.
And it especially relates to people of color and to Black people. This is, what are you doing here? This is not your neighborhood. And by that, I mean the business community. So I think in New York, people are generally so much more interested in making progress of their own. Atlanta, so much more interested in making progress on their own. What they call it, the city too busy to hate. Well, if they're busy making money, they don't have time to hate. And Philadelphia has not been that place. So we're still struggling with that.
We are struggling with it, and I mean, I honestly, I don't know how we get beyond it. Quite honestly, I mean, there are some areas where I think there can be progress. I think, because of people like you, there was a lot of focus on the construction industry. And I think that because there's been a lot of focus on the construction industry, there has been progress on the enterprise side in the construction industry in terms of diversification. But when you look at other, areas, I mean, even what you do, I mean, I tell people all the time in my line of business, I say, it's hard to sell Black intellectual property, right? Because generally white people ain't really in the market for it, quite honestly. And Black people don't have the money to pay for it. So it kind of puts you in a bind. And so in terms of, kind of more traditional professional service areas, law, accounting, what you do.
Communications, right. We established from that early on the fact that we were a Black firm, but we had to try to get business from the largest corporations we possibly could.
Right.
And only in that way could we ensure a stable cash flow.
Right.
And if you're trying to work with small businesses, not just small businesses, but certainly the broad range of community organizations, especially broad range of community organizations in impoverished neighborhoods, you would go broke. You could not survive. And so we decided that we would do pro bono work for, try to be like you lawyer people, We would do pro bono communications for people that we thought had a good reason to exist and to function and to have their story told. We do that every year. We put it in our budget. But other than that, you can't live off that. There's not enough cash in the community, not enough capital in the community. And on top of that, one of the vestiges of slavery is that Black people have been taught not to trust one another. And that's still there. And another vestige of slavery was that people who were African American, who were on a plantation, were told that if they were able to discover some kind of conspiratorial processes happening among the slaves and report that back to the slave master, they could be freed. And
it would be rewarded. And
they did that. And some of that is still a part of our makeup, a part of our DNA.
But to me, I completely agree with you. I think it's more of the makeup of this city though than in other places. And I think part of that is that, you talk about New York, you talk about Chicago, you talk about Atlanta, you talk about LA. Like Philadelphia is a poor city, right? Like it is a poor city. It is the poorest, I believe it's still the poorest big city in the country. And so I think that just creates or it helps to create a mentality and an environment where people aren't generous to one another.
Well, let's look at it another way. The other way to look at it is that Philadelphia is also the city most comprised of people of color in the state of Pennsylvania. And I used to think that Pittsburgh was a big city too. And Pittsburgh has about 160,000 people.
Yeah, right.
And we've got 1.5 million.
Right.
And Pittsburgh has 15% Blacks, and we have 45% Blacks and Hispanics and Asians. Together, we comprise 66% of the population, but all of them are suffering the same indignity, the same lack of access to jobs and capital. And so there's not, so the majority of the population in the city of Philadelphia is comprised of people who don't have wealth. And those people who don't have wealth happen to be Black. And you would think that the Black folks themselves would understand that and come together and figure out a way to do what's right. And I think a part of it is that the whites who have been the leadership in the public and private sector don't understand the value that would accrue to them, to their own neighborhoods, to their own corporations, if you could mobilize that untapped reservoir of talent and expertise. And until that happens, Philadelphia is going to be broke.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I do believe, as I do more corporate work, that you do have some companies that see that there is an economic value to diversifying your workforce. There's an economic value in diversifying your supplier base. There's an economic value in all of this. There's cost savings. There is a benefit.
Supply diversity.
Brand. Yes, correct.
On the front end. There's a supply diversity cost saving on the front end.
Right.
Until those companies get big enough to charge the going rate.
Well, yeah, but you got to get there, right? You got to get there. You got to get there. But
that's right.
But the point is, though, that there is, there are companies now that understand the value of it. And what is concerning to me, quite honestly, is that the city government hasn't figured that out. And I'm trying to understand, why is it that the city government hasn't figured that out?
Well, there are a number of resources that you could tap to help to understand that. And one is a book called The Irish in Philadelphia,
Huh.
10 Generations of Urban Experience.
Huh.
You should read that. You
I
should read that.
will.
You should read that book because it talks about an ongoing struggle between Blacks and that ethnic group. Because when they came here, they really had no discernible skill set, no professional background. And Blacks were doing work in construction and all kinds of other things. And we were building White Houses and building the Capitol building and doing major construction in large entities here in Philadelphia. And they said, we can do that work.
Yeah.
And so they started, I don't want to have them take your podcast off the air, but they started to, according to this book, which was written by a very credible man of Irish descent, they started setting fire to orphanages and churches in the Black community to discourage their involvement in that trade. And so this has been a vestige of what happened back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that it has happened quite that way, but if you in other cities, but Boston is close.
Boston is close.
Boston is close.
I agree.
I agree. Right. And the was the movie that Scorsese did about the
The Departed.
No. The one about the 1800s when the Irishmen got off.
Gangs of New York.
Gangs of New York. And it was, and as I was watching Gangs of New York, I was thinking, this is Philadelphia.
Yeah. Yes. Gangs
of New York. And those people were not coming here to abuse people of color. They were in fact packaged by their government and sold in groups to the United States, so that menial labor could be done, so that things that were one step above slavery could be done. Yes. So it pitted them against us.
Yes.
In this economy.
Yes.
And so Philadelphia and Boston are two really blatant examples of what happens when that goes on.
I think the difference is that it's interesting because Boston is, despite its smaller size, it is the wealthier city. So I think that the manifestation of all of that was different. But nevertheless, you still have the same issues in terms, at least for Black folks, I think, in that community that you have. Right. A lot of the same issues you have here. Right. So there was one more topic I did want to, because I know we're hitting up on the hour, and I really appreciate this. First of all, this has been fantastic. This has been as fantastic as I knew it was going to be. Like I knew. I did want to ask you about your work, your diversity and inclusion work at Independence Blue Cross. I know you're doing that stuff on the board. So what kind of initiatives are you guys focused on?
Well, let me say that when I joined the board, before Fred DeBona came in. Fred DeBona had his own company, Keystone Health Plan, and he wanted to join the corporation and be elected the president of what was then Independence Blue Cross. And so he was walking around talking to people. I was on the board then, and he was walking around talking to board members and saying, look, vote for me, and I'll do whatever you think makes sense for the corporation. And Bob Sorrell and I were on the board at that time. And when we had our meeting with Fred, we said, it would be good if you could set up a board level committee on diversity, because it needs to be done. And no other Blue Cross affiliate across the country had a board level committee on diversity and inclusion. But Fred, good to his word, when he got in, set that up. And so what we're doing now is just what has developed since that date. And it's an internal focus, it's an external focus. And now you see, as I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, we've got an African-American CEO, and all of that is a part of the culture.
That's huge.
Yeah. Oh, no other large corporation in Philly can say that. I mean, we do a little bit every day. But that's what's most important. And Dan Hilferty, when he was the CEO, he made sure that it was the culture, right? And it wasn't marginalized. It wasn't, right. You know, if we had a meeting of the diversity and inclusion committee, Dan always attended that meeting.
Right.
And word gets out that the CEO goes to that committee meeting and doesn't go to others. And they say, oh, this must be important. So having the support from the top of the management was good for that board level organization.
I say it all the time. If a company is going to be serious about diversity and inclusion, there has to be intentionality, and that intentionality has to start from the top. It can't be a bottom up. Corporations are not democracies. Corporations, you know, have boards, have CEOs, and that kind of initiative has to start from the top.
We say all the time in dealing with current and past and historical clients of ours, you can't have good PR if the CEO doesn't want it. So you go to them, they tell you what the problem is. You go back to the shop and you put together a campaign concept, you put together a branding concept, and the CEO says, nah, I don't think I want to do that. Well, then that's it. I mean, you look at people who are public figures, and you know that these people have access to the greatest minds in PR. But when these greatest minds come in, they tell them to go to hell.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it. I'm the CEO. I'm the boss, and you're not.
Yeah.
And so what you say is important in our industry too.
Yeah. Bruce Crawley, this has been fantastic. I greatly appreciate
I enjoyed it.
coming on. I really, really do. And thank you for listening. I look forward to having this conversation and keeping it going. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.